In 2019, the Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was sentenced to life in prison after a decades-long effort to extradite him to the US to stand trial.
Violence along the US-Mexico border has reached alarming levels, sparked by a high-stakes operation aimed at dismantling the Sinaloa cartel. Targeting key leaders like Guzman Lopez and Ismael El Mayo Zambada, this move has ignited a brutal response from the cartels, escalating tensions between the US and Mexico. With former President Donald Trump's aggressive stance on border security and cartel violence.
Furthermore, I will order the Department of Defense to make appropriate use of special forces, cyber warfare, and other overt and covert actions to inflict maximum damage on cartel leadership, infrastructure, and operations.
The situation has quickly spiraled into a full-scale crisis, threatening to destabilize the entire region. Trump's return to the political stage has revived tensions on both sides of the border. His administration's aggressive stance on border security and drug trafficking has been coupled with heightened threats of military action against the cartels.
The president pulls me aside on at least a couple occasions and suggests that maybe we have the U.S. military shoot missiles into Mexico.
Shoot missiles into Mexico for what?
He would say to go after the cartels. And we would have this private discussion where I'd say, Mr. President, I understand the motive, because he was very serious about dealing with drugs in America.
The Sinaloa cartel and others like it have flourished despite previous attempts to curb their influence. And now, as the violence intensifies, both U.S. citizens and Mexican nationals face an unprecedented threat. For years, the cartels have dominated drug and human trafficking routes, and the push to eliminate these criminal networks has led to increasingly violent conflicts, particularly in border towns that were once considered peaceful. What began as a focused U.S. military operation has spiraled into an all-out battle for control over critical drug and human trafficking routes, threatening communities on both sides of the border. A pivotal moment that triggered this escalation occurred earlier this year when the U.S. launched an operation targeting the associates of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. This operation focused on Guzman's son, Guzman Lopez, and his longtime partner, Ismael Zambada, set off a wave of violence that quickly spread from Mexican soil to areas near the border.
It's not the first time Ovidio Guzman has been in custody. He was arrested in 2019, but in a major embarrassment, Mexican authorities released him after cartel gunmen unleashed a wave of violence.
The tensions that had been brewing within the cartels boiled over, and violence erupted in full force. Rival factions within the cartels began fighting for control over lucrative trafficking routes, intensifying the overall conflict. Trump's rhetoric on the issue, often characterized by his unwavering commitment to destroying the cartels, only served to stoke the flames, turning the southern U.S. border into a hotbed of violence.
Well, we have to help Mexico, and we have to stymie the cartels. Either we will get the full cooperation of other governments to stop this menace, or we will expose every bribe, every kickback, every payoff, and every bit of corruption that is allowing the cartels to preserve their brutal reign, and it is indeed brutal.
One of the most alarming incidents in this ongoing violence occurred just last month, when a brutal clash erupted between rival factions of the Gulf Cartel. This battle, fought between the Scorpions and the Metros, took place just a mile away from Donna, Texas, in the town of Rio Bravo, located in Tamaulipas, Mexico. The violence centered on control of vital trafficking routes, and it unfolded with terrifying intensity. Gunfire, explosions, and rapid exchanges of weapons were captured in real time through thermal drone footage provided by the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS. This footage served as clear visual evidence of the escalating power of the cartels and their ability to wage war near the U.S. border. The confrontation underscored the growing brazenness of the cartels, who now operate with greater impunity than ever before. Texas DPS spokesperson Christopher Olivares confirmed the intensity of the situation in an interview, pointing out that the violence stemmed from an internal power struggle within the Gulf Cartel. This cartel, once a dominant force in the region, is now deeply divided, with various factions, such as the Scorpions and the Metros, fighting for supremacy. The result is a vicious cycle of violence, with both cartel members and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. The residents of Rio Bravo, as well as nearby towns like Dana, have been living in fear as these violent clashes unfold in their own backyard. The proximity of these events to the U.S. has made the threat even more real for Americans living along the border, who now face the very real prospect of cartel violence spilling over into their communities. What makes this incident even more concerning is the geographic closeness of the violence. Rio Bravo's location, just a stone's throw from Texas, means that gunfire and explosions reverberated across the border, reaching not only residents in Mexico, but also those living in U.S. towns like Dana. The violence has crossed into the U.S. consciousness, forcing Americans who live in these border regions to confront the reality that cartel wars could come to their doorsteps. This has intensified the sense of urgency for both Mexican and U.S. authorities, who now face a crisis that requires swift and decisive action. Unfortunately, law enforcement efforts have struggled to keep pace with the growing violence, as the cartel's firepower and reach continue to increase. As the violence continues, U.S. public opinion on border security has grown more volatile. The U.S. public, increasingly concerned about the implications of unchecked cartel power, has been vocal in demanding stronger action. Trump's hardline stance, along with his support for militarizing the border, has gained traction, as polls show that many Americans believe more needs to be done to secure the border and combat cartel violence. This rhetoric, combined with growing concerns about national security, has contributed to an escalating sense of urgency on the part of both U.S. and state officials. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has responded to the growing crisis by ramping up his state's efforts to combat cartel violence.
Hey, Natasha, Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw wants to create a special House task force, a special committee with the goal of bringing down Mexican cartels. Now, according to Congressman Crenshaw, this bill would authorize the use of military force against either the Sinaloa or Jalisco Mexican cartels.
Abbott has publicly supported the labeling of cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, a designation that would open the door for more aggressive military and law enforcement actions. The Texas government has allocated more resources toward tackling cartel-related violence, and local law enforcement has been working with federal agencies to carry out joint operations. Abbott's tough stance mirrors that of Trump, who has made cartel violence a central issue in his bid for re-election in 2024. The toll of cartel violence is becoming increasingly apparent, with deadly clashes continuing to occur throughout the border region. Just weeks before the Rio Bravo incident, another deadly encounter broke out between rival cartel factions, resulting in the deaths of 6 people. These violent confrontations have become more frequent, and the civilian population in affected areas is growing increasingly vulnerable. In Chihuahua State, for example, law enforcement had to respond to a deadly clash that took place late on a Sunday night, further demonstrating how widespread cartel violence has become. The instability in these regions has raised alarms that the situation could spiral completely out of control if left unchecked. In the face of such escalating violence, both the U.S. and Mexico must find a way to balance security measures with the need to address the underlying factors driving the cartel wars. While efforts to dismantle cartel leadership are critical, the violence has become a larger issue that requires comprehensive solutions, including social, economic, and law enforcement reforms. As the U.S. and Mexico continue to grapple with these challenges, the future of border security remains uncertain. The question now is not whether the violence will continue, but how both countries will confront the growing power of the cartels and the threat they pose to both sides of the border. Rising tensions and Trump's stance on military action against cartels. Trump's aggressive stance on cartel violence has been met with both praise and criticism. But one thing is clear, the stakes have risen dramatically. As border violence continues to escalate, Trump has openly advocated for military action to deal with the cartels.
Finally, as I have said before, I will ask Congress to pass legislation ensuring that drug smugglers and human traffickers receive the death penalty.
In recent speeches and campaign rallies, Trump has called for the U.S. military to take decisive action against the cartels, even if it means bypassing the Mexican government. He has suggested that military strikes, similar to the operation that led to the death of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, could be used to eliminate cartel leaders and disrupt their operations. Trump's proposal to deploy special forces into Mexico and target cartel leadership has generated significant attention, with some supporting the idea as a necessary step to protect American citizens and secure the border. While Trump's rhetoric has garnered attention, it has also faced significant opposition, particularly from Mexican officials who are vehemently opposed to U.S. military action on their soil. Former Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has made it clear that such actions would be seen as an infringement on Mexican sovereignty, and many fear that such an escalation could harm U.S. and Mexico relations. Despite this opposition, Trump and other Republican lawmakers are pushing forward with the idea, arguing that the U.S. military should not hesitate to take action against cartels, especially as their violence grows more dangerous. Some even suggest that U.S. military operations could target not just Mexican cartels, but also cartels operating in countries like Colombia or other Latin American nations where the cartels have international operations. Trump's call for military action against cartels represents a shift from the more traditional diplomatic and law enforcement approaches. It reflects the growing frustration that many Americans feel as they witness the increasing lawlessness along the border. Republican lawmakers such as Senator Lindsey Graham and others have proposed bills that would authorize U.S. military forces to take action against cartels, essentially treating them as enemies of the state. These bills would allow military strikes against cartels anywhere in the world and grant special forces the authority to neutralize cartel leaders and operatives without necessarily requiring the approval of foreign governments. The idea of deploying U.S. forces into Mexico is still highly controversial. Critics argue that it could destabilize the region even further and strain U.S.-Mexico relations, which are already fragile due to issues surrounding immigration and trade. Others believe that such an action could risk escalating the conflict and cause further harm to innocent civilians caught between cartels and military forces. In contrast, proponents argue that if the U.S. is serious about eliminating the cartel threat, stronger measures are necessary, and military intervention might be the only effective option. Another aspect of the situation that remains unresolved is the ongoing issue of human trafficking and smuggling. Cartels have gained a stranglehold over migrant routes, effectively controlling the movement of people across the border. In response, U.S. and Mexican authorities have attempted to tighten border security, but the sheer scale of the operation and the power of the cartels make it a difficult challenge. Border patrols have been increased, and the Texas National Guard has taken a more active role in securing the border. However, the cartels continue to profit from human trafficking, and the brutality they display in controlling migrant flows shows no signs of waning. The growing number of unaccompanied minors attempting to cross the border has significantly worsened the crisis. Cartels are taking advantage of vulnerable children and families, using them as part of their profit-driven schemes. Many of these minors endure inhumane conditions as they are smuggled into the U.S., further complicating an already dire situation. These alarming trends reveal that the problem extends well beyond the drug trade. The cartels' involvement in human trafficking, along with their violent tactics, has intensified the humanitarian crisis on both sides of the border. The exploitation of children underscores the need for a broader, more comprehensive response to address the full scope of these criminal operations and the devastating toll they are taking on vulnerable individuals. This is not just an issue of illegal migration, but one that involves severe human rights violations and systemic violence. Mexico's economic vulnerability. As Mexico prepares for another term under Trump, the economic outlook remains uncertain. His administration's past policies on tariffs, immigration, and drug trafficking had already strained relations between the two nations. However, Trump's campaign promised to impose steep tariffs on Mexican imports, particularly on vehicles, threatens to exacerbate tensions. Given Mexico's heavy dependence on trade with the U.S., especially in the automotive sector, the prospect of a 100% tariff on cars could lead to severe economic consequences. Such a move would likely trigger widespread financial instability, affecting not only the automotive industry, but the broader Mexican economy as well. Mexico's economy, which depends on trade for growth, is particularly vulnerable. Over 80% of its exports head to the U.S., and already fragile growth could be disrupted further if such tariffs were to take effect. Experts, including Juan Carlos Moreno Brid, an economics professor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, have warned that Mexico's economy is nearing a recession. The peso in particular has already shown signs of weakening, dropping to its lowest level in 2 years against the dollar in early November 2024. This depreciation of the peso reflects widespread concerns about what the future holds under a second Trump term. Martha Barcina, the former Mexican ambassador to Washington, voiced concern over Trump's rhetoric and promises, warning that they could go beyond mere campaign tactics. She stressed that even small increases in tariffs could spark serious economic issues for Mexico, including higher unemployment and poverty, which would only intensify migration pressures. A large segment of Mexico's population depends on remittances from the U.S., so any measures that destabilize the economy would have far-reaching consequences, especially in terms of immigration. The interconnectedness of these issues means that economic instability could further fuel the complex dynamics surrounding migration, adding to the challenges both countries face. A changing relationship with the U.S. On the political front, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has already reached out to President-elect Trump. Describing their initial phone call as cordial, Sheinbaum has emphasized the need for continued dialogue. Mexico's close economic ties with the United States, bolstered by their shared supply chains and mutual interests, make open communication vital. Despite the rhetoric and concerns from both sides, experts believe that Trump's policies, particularly on trade and immigration, might face substantial resistance from U.S. businesses that have vested interests in Mexico. A large portion of the U.S. manufacturing sector relies on the Mexican workforce, with many companies having either full operations or shared investments in Mexico. These companies would be unlikely to support significant tariffs or trade restrictions that could disrupt their supply chains. On the issue of trade, Mexico has found a degree of stability under the USMCA US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which replaced NAFTA. Marcelo Ebrard, Mexico's Minister of Foreign Affairs, has stated that the USMCA has yielded positive trade results, with Mexico's exports to the U.S. seeing a significant increase of 6.5% from 2023 to 2024. This highlights the interconnectedness of the two economies, especially as U.S. firms have a substantial footprint in Mexico's manufacturing sector. Even so, a change in U.S. policy could have devastating consequences for the Mexican economy, particularly if tariffs or new trade restrictions are imposed. Experts suggest that the future of U.S.-Mexico trade relations may depend on the outcome of the 2026 USMCA review. Since Trump was a major supporter of the agreement, there is optimism that his administration could advocate for its continuation. However, Mexico will likely need to enter into thorough negotiations to ensure that the terms remain advantageous. This trade relationship holds significant importance, not just for economic reasons, but also for maintaining political stability in both countries. The stakes are high, and careful diplomacy will be crucial in determining the path forward for both nations' shared interests. Trump's immigration policies, repercussions for Mexico and beyond. Beyond trade and tariffs, another area where Mexico is bracing for significant policy changes is immigration. Trump has made clear his stance on curbing illegal immigration from Latin America, which has already been a focal point of his administration. He has suggested that even more stringent measures could be implemented during his second term, potentially including the reinstatement of the controversial Remain in Mexico policy. Under this policy, migrants seeking asylum in the U.S. would be required to stay in Mexico until their immigration court hearings. This would place additional strain on Mexico, which already faces challenges related to its own immigration system. One of the most significant concerns for Mexico is Trump's intention to deport millions of undocumented immigrants residing in the U.S. While estimates vary, a large proportion of these individuals are Mexican nationals. If such mass deportations were to occur, the economic impact on Mexico could be devastating. Every year, immigrants in the U.S. send approximately $60 billion in remittances back to Mexico, a crucial lifeline for many families. The potential loss of this financial support would hurt the Mexican economy, especially in rural areas, where dependence on remittances is particularly high. Emi Perez, a street vendor in Mexico City, expressed the sentiment shared by many. He can't send all the Mexicans back, can he? Who's going to do all the work in the United States if there are no Mexicans? The reality is that Mexican labor is deeply embedded in the U.S. economy, and removing this workforce could disrupt several industries, from agriculture to construction. Trump's rhetoric surrounding immigration has already sparked fear among many in Mexico. As one migrant rights activist, Ino Muhaha, noted, Trump can do whatever he wants now. He has all the support he needs. This underscores the anxiety felt by many in Mexico, where the prospect of mass deportations looms large. Project 2025, a blueprint for radical change? One of the most alarming aspects of Trump's second campaign is the Project 2025 proposal, a comprehensive blueprint for a conservative overhaul of U.S. government policy. Spanning nearly 900 pages, Project 2025 lays out an ambitious agenda to reshape the country's institutions, from dismantling the Department of Education to banning certain forms of adult media. Perhaps most concerning for both U.S. and Mexican citizens is the proposed overhaul of immigration policy, which includes fast-tracking deportations, eliminating temporary protected status (TPS), and limiting student visas. The Heritage Foundation, a major conservative think tank, played a central role in the development of Project 2025. Critics argue that its proposals could severely restrict the rights of immigrants and vulnerable communities. The plan's immigration policies, in particular, have raised concerns about the potential erosion of protections for undocumented individuals, including those who have lived in the U.S. for years without legal status. Critics also fear that the plan's proposals could lead to a further erosion of civil rights protections, particularly for women and minority communities. As with Trump's previous policies, the central issue remains the restriction of immigration, with critics arguing that the changes could lead to a greater number of vulnerable people being deported or left without protections. Following Trump's 2024 election victory, the United States finds itself increasingly divided, with concerns mounting over the implementation of policies outlined in Project 2025. The proposed changes are expected to have far-reaching impacts not only within the U.S., but also on its relations with neighboring countries like Mexico. While Trump's supporters believe these policies will bring much-needed order and stability, his critics fear they will deepen national divisions and undermine the country's global reputation. For Mexico, Trump's win raises significant concerns. The country is already dealing with the devastating effects of the ongoing war on drugs, which has fueled a sharp rise in violence and insecurity. This crisis has been exacerbated by the U.S. government's often one-sided approach to combating drug cartels, exemplified by the 2024 operation targeting cartel leaders. Though the operation aimed to disrupt drug trafficking, it has instead intensified violence within Mexico, worsening the already fragile security situation. As a result, tensions between the two nations have continued to grow, with both sides struggling to navigate the complex and dangerous dynamics at play. In conclusion, the future of U.S.-Mexico relations under a second Trump administration is fraught with uncertainty. Economic ties, immigration policies, and security concerns will continue to shape the relationship between the two nations. As Mexico prepares for the potential consequences of Trump's second term, it remains to be seen how both sides will navigate the challenges ahead. With the U.S. election results in, the world watches closely to see how Trump's policies will take shape. For Mexico, the stakes are high. The outcome of trade talks, security agreements, and immigration policies could define the future of U.S.-Mexico relations for years to come. With tensions already running high, it is clear that the relationship between these two countries will continue to be one of the most complex and consequential in global geopolitics. The escalating cartel violence is a crisis that demands attention and action. What are your thoughts on these border tensions? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more updates.